Hi guys, welcome to our daily encounter. In Judges chapter 16, the topic of Samson's strength and power comes up. The Philistines want to know, what is the source of Samson's strength? This was a man who was very powerful physically. He was able to pick up gates, even pulling the bars up from the ground. He was able to also kill thousands of people with the jawbone of a donkey. This is a man who exemplified great power and strength, and they just couldn't capture him. And they wanted to know, how is it that they could capture him? How could they get around this strength and power that he had? And they used Delilah to figure this out. And it takes a lot of persistence by Delilah to finally get it out of Samson where his source of strength was. And Samson finally admits that it's in his hair. If they would cut his hair, he would lose his strength, his power, and he'd be like any other man. You see, Samson was under the Nazirite vow, which required him to not cut his hair. He was consecrated unto the Lord, and as long as his hair was long and he didn't cut it, he remained consecrated to God. But if he was to cut his hair, that consecration would be violated, and then his strength would be depleted. And that's exactly what happens as he's sleeping in the lap, his head in the lap of Delilah. She cuts his hair and then yells out, the Philistines are upon you. Samson gets up as though he could overtake them, just like at all times. And lo and behold, he has no strength and no power. And they capture him, gouge out his eyes, and put him into prison. And so Samson lost his strength. He lost his power when he was cut off from the covering of his hair. Now, as we think about this in the context of our relationship with Christ, we too have a source of strength, a source of power, just like Samson did. And our source of strength and power is divine, just like his strength and power was as well. His source was based on consecration, and our strength is based on consecration as well. We are consecrated unto the Lord, and as we are consecrated unto the Lord and dedicated to Him and abiding in Him, we find a strength, a power that flows through us and to us through Jesus Christ. And we find this in two passages that kind of give us a contrast, but in giving the contrast, they kind of give us the full picture of where our source of strength is as Christians. In Philippians chapter 4 and verse 13, it says, I can do all things through Him who strengthens me. They're referring to Christ. The Apostle Paul said, I can endure all different types of scenarios in life because I have someone who is strengthening me, empowering me to be able to do that. But we contrast that with what we find in John chapter 15, and we find that without Christ, we can do nothing. He says in verse 4, abide in me and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself unless it abides in the vine, so neither can you unless you abide in me. And he says in verse 5, for apart from me, you can do nothing. And so you take Paul's phrase, I can do all things through Him who strengthens me, and then Jesus' words, without me, you can do nothing. We find that our strength and our power absolutely and completely comes from Christ. And as we are abiding in Christ and living in Christ and covered by Christ, we have a strength and a power to overcome the trials, the difficulties, the hardships of this life. And that's where our source of strength is. But we have to be careful that we don't cut ourselves off from that source of power and strength. Because it might be that we might do the same thing that Samson did. We might fall asleep. We might allow ourselves to spiritually fall asleep. And when we fall asleep, it gives the opportunity to the enemy to separate us and keep us from the covering of Christ. That is, we become distracted. We begin to operate out of our own strength. We begin to lean on the world primarily, or other things primarily, to trust in other things besides Christ. And we lose that commitment, that consecration, that dedication to Christ that perhaps we once had. And whenever we start getting further and further away from Christ, we get further and further away from the strength that He supplies. And so it's important for us to not fall asleep spiritually, but to remain awake and to remain alert and to keep ourselves constantly abiding in Christ through prayer, through worship, through the reading of the Word, whatever we can do to keep our hearts connected to Christ and to remain abiding in Christ, because He is our true source of strength. So we don't want to end up like Samson did and one day wake up and think that we have the same strength and power that we had before when we were walking in close communion to Christ, and then all of a sudden find out we have no strength at all, and find out that without Christ, we have no strength against temptation, against trials, against hardships and difficulties. And as such, we become vulnerable to the enemy. So we want to remain abiding in Christ. As Samson needed the covering of his hair in consecration, we need the covering of Christ in consecration and remain dedicated to Him and abiding in Him. So here's some things we can reflect on and think about as we do our reading today. With that, guys, I do thank you for watching the video today. Hope you guys have a great day. Love you guys. God bless.